Hello and welcome to the Miscast table. My name is Måns, and tonight I'm joined by Jonas, André, and Martin, and we're gonna take a look at the glimpse of the first rules for Warhammer: The Old World. Hello, guys. You feeling all right?
Quite so. It's fun to finally see some rules.
So, should we take a look at the article that Warhammer Community has released? And it's called
Let's go through it from top to bottom.
Yeah, and it's called Old World Almanac, your first look at the rules. And the first part that we get right here is the game structure, and it's basically all the turns of the game, or the turn sequence. And it has changed since 8th edition.
Yes. I'm not sure how much really, but they basically move half the magic phase first, and some magic are sprinkled.
Yeah, and this article focuses on the strategy phase, which is the first part of the turn sequence. And in Warhammer: The Old World, it was movement phase, magic phase, shooting phase, and then close combat. But now the magic phase is gone and replaced with the strategy phase, which is the first phase of the game.
And I think it's healthy for the game to have a start of turn phase where you can put all the rules that you want to trigger ahead of anything else. It's been a bit wonky at times in 8th edition when you are supposed to rule for random movement, when are you supposed to rule for stupidity, when are you supposed to rule for what's the test called where you have frenzy and then you have to make a charge test if you fail it.
I'm not sure what it's called, but you need to roll it for a calm down test. I don't know.
But now you supposedly make all of those tests in the start of the strategy phase. And as far as I can tell, there are 4 sub-phases to each of these major turn sequences. So in total, 16 phases for each turn that is to be played out.
Yeah, so if you read through this, we first have the strategy phase. And during that phase, you can the active player attempts to cast enchantment or hex spells and make use of certain special rules before attempting to rally any fleeing units. So that means that unit can actually flee. I was a bit worried that the push and pull mechanic was gonna remove the flee and overrun stuff, but that doesn't necessarily seem true.
They mention it later down in the article. There seems to be an intermittent step between stalemate and outright breaking and fleeing, but we'll get to it.
Yeah, and then you have the movement phase, and the movement phase starts with declaration of charges, as usual. And you have charge reactions, and then movement of the charging units. And after that comes compulsory movement, and finally any remaining moves is carrying out. And after that, clairvoyance spells are cast. So the movement phase seems pretty much exactly the same as in 8th, except for the spell casting step.
I think the conveyance spells should be a category that alters the table in some way, because it's pretty divided. You can cast augment and spells in the first, and then conveyance, and then magic missiles and assailment spells. So to have the corresponding spells in the right phase feels correct. Like you can buff your dudes, or in the strategy phase before you do the break test or the rallying, you can use magical items and so on. It feels more correctly paced in some way.
But what do you think about having to make the augments or hex spells cast before you make any movements? It feels like they're going to remove some of the risk. Because let's say that you have an important combat upcoming, and you really want to get off Wisson's Wild Form or whatever the equivalent spell is going to be called in the Old World. Now you are going to be able to know if you get the spell cast or not before you make any charges or moves. And I think that really changes the dynamics.
You mean the fact that you cast hex spells or enchantment spells in the strategy phase?
Yeah, because before at previous you had to make the charge, and then you didn't really know if you were going to get the spell or not.
I guess that makes sense. So it has changed a bit.
I think that's a major strategical change.
Well, I'm not quite sure. Don't you mean if you do, it's the opposite, right? Not
But if you
before
compare
you
to 8th
you could
edition,
do the charge. You saw if you made the charge, then you put the spells. Now it's worse. You put spells, and you're not sure if you will make the charge.
But I kind of understand what both of you are saying, but I think Jonas' point is that you maybe made a charge, but you know that you weren't gonna win that combat unless you got, for example, Wisdom's Wild Form. Now you can know beforehand that you have Wisdom's Wild Form, and therefore you can dare to take the charge.
Yes.
But there's a risk in both ways, I suppose, because you can get Wisdom's Wild Form and then you fail the charge. You wouldn't have needed to cast that spell in the first place. So I guess it goes both ways.
yeah.
The
But
thing
I
I see
think
with
that
doing this with magic and removing the magic phase is I would assume that the winds of magic is gone. And what winds of magic gave us was that it made that the opponent had a pool of dice, and it was a very strategic choice to choose what to dispel and not to dispel.
Yeah.
In this setup, we are not sure, or at least I'm not sure, do we have a chance to dispel, or is it only a successful and then it's on?
Yeah,
It
that's
has
a
to be
good
some dice. Further down in the article, you will stumble upon, they mentioned that in the strategic phase, you take turns. You alternate wizards that cast spells.
Yeah, and I think this is an interesting thing. Going back to what you said there, Martin, because it says further down that you alternate casting spells. But if you look at the strategy phase, it says during the strategy phase, the active player attempts to cast spells.
Yeah.
But then in the movement phase itself, finally, any remaining movement is carried out and conveyance spells are cast. And that implies that in the strategy phase, only the active player can cast spells. But in the movement phase, it doesn't specify that it's only the active player, which leads me to believe that maybe the non-active player can't always cast spells in all these spell windows, but in some of them they can.
Yeah, and where they mention it further down is in the conjuration phase, so in the strategy phase. So the hexes and augment spells, from what I can read, you take turns.
It might be that you pass the turn, so you pass who is the active player during the
it
turn.
would be, like, most strategical death would come from them having magical spells that are like you can activate them at any time of the game. Like
But
it would
is
make the most.
we are not sure, right? Or I haven't read it. If both players are active during each phase, so I would say that the phase one strategic phase, I first make a spell, and then Mons make a spell, and then I, and then Mons. So I would be like I'm not sure. It has a name, like when you don't do
Priority.
all the. You
But I
have
think like in Warhammer Underworlds, you pass who is the active player, right? Depending on.
during each phase, right?
I think so. It was a while since I played, but something along
Isn't
those lines.
shoot me in the foot? But isn't Sigmar the same way?
I'm not actually sure, but in the if you go to the shooting phase, for example, it says during the shooting phase, the active player shoots with those units in their army armed with missile weapons, with their war machines, and attempt to cast magic missiles and magical vortex spells. And that implies that I don't think that implies that both players can shoot and they take turns. So yeah, I'm not really sure, and it would be a bit weird as well to be able to cast like magical missiles and vortexes in your opponent's turn.
But what if it's not an opponent turn? What if it's just a turn? So one turn, both do strategic phase, then both do magic movement phase, and then both do shooting phase, and both do combat phase.
No, it says further below. They describe how turn works.
Okay.
So it is the same as in 8 with the turn that one player goes through all the phases and then they pass the turn. So yeah, I'm not really sure if you'll be able to cast in all phases. And then you have the combat phase, and during this phase, units fight in deadly hand-to-hand melee combat, and wizards attempt to fend off their attackers with assailment spells. And units that have lost combat may be driven back or become broken and flee. And at the end of this phase, once all combats have been resolved, the active player turns ends.
Yeah.
But I think it's pretty fun thing that you can cast spells in every turn. Or in every like phase. I think that's an interesting change. The big thing for me is like how does it work with like spell dice? Do you roll in the beginning of turn and you receive like 10 and your opponent receives 6? Or is it like in Age of Sigmar where one magician maybe can cast 2 spells and dispel 2 spells? I think that is a more boring way of doing it. But
I think for like the sake of allowing players to keep track of how many spell dice do I have left, they can't really go that route, that you have to keep track on how many spell dice do each of us have over the course of whole turns phases. It's hard enough to keep track on.
I don't
in
think
the
you will have
regular
a spell
magic phase.
dice. I don't think you will have spell dice.
Yeah, I think it's much more likely that each wizard has like a basic roll, like let's say 2d6, and then you have modifiers, and
Yes.
possibly that you have a limit on whether or not you can attempt to dispel
Or it's
that
only
there are-
one die, and a wizard have, for example, one wizard have a 4+ to be able to do a spell. So then he needs to do a 4+ on one spell, or that a spell needs a certain number,
yeah,
and you
but
have it's the same dice on everything.
but that's the same as in AOS. Basically.
I think that's since you can cast spells and in every phase, that's most likely the way they go, and the wins is gone.
Probably are, and that might also mean that the miscast table is gone, which makes me a bit sad since that is our namesake. So I hope it stays. But I had to say that, like the framework, the way they put up the phases here, it is very similar to old fantasy. So it seems like at least the phases of the game and like maybe like the core sequencing is pretty much the same, and I think that's a good thing at least.
Yeah, it does feel like we are gonna get a newer version of the old world,
Yeah.
but that it's still gonna be in the same spirit. So I'm
Yeah.
so far I'm optimistic. I kind of like the at the start of the turn phase. I think that makes sense to clean up some of the rules.
Yeah, and I said this before, like when you can start the problem in 8, for example, I have the rule book here. You have Brianna's time warp, and that is a spell that doubles your movement. But since the movement phase in 8 has already passed when you cast it, it starts to work first in the next turn, and that makes it a bit wonky. And for those kind of spells, it's really good to be able to cast them before you move, since it makes more sense.
But that spell, in contrary, it would be much too powerful if you could cast it the way it is in this new way of playing the game.
Yeah, maybe.
So they're really gonna have to rebalance all of the old spells.
Yeah. Apparently, in 4th edition, you were casting in the same phase magic. So this could be a small throwback to an older edition.
Both players?
Yeah. From what I've read, I was barely alive at the time, but
I'm barely alive right now, but that's
it's one day. But I'm thinking about they have broken it down pretty good in where you can cast the different spells. So you have augment and hexes in the strategy phase. You have conveyance or transportation spells in the movement phase. You have shooting, magic missile, and vortexes.
Where do you have that?
Phase.
It states in the turn sequence.
Yeah.
There you go. Say what spell in
magic
what
missile and magic vortexes, and then you have combat phase, assailment spells. And I had to look the word up, and translates to assault or attack spells. So
You
should
can say
be
like
some
the
close combat magic as
assailant
well.
if you've been attacked, yeah. But I think that wizards are generally weak in close combat in 8th, and you always have to be scared of them getting killed because they can't really fight back unless they're like a demon prince. So I think that's quite fun, that wizards have something to do in the combat phase as well. But when I read this and see that you can cast spells in every turn and even in close combat, I feel like the value of wizards have gone up.
Definitely.
Like it feels like it's more important to have a wizard when I'm reading this.
At the same time, like the values from Wizard in 8th edition came from their ability to absolutely massacre with some of their limited spells, like Dwellers from Below and Purple Sun. I would find it hard to argue that those are not like amongst the strongest units in 8th edition.
Yeah, they are incredibly
I
strong.
also argue
and,
that just
if-
having
if-
a wizard to dispel was very powerful in 8th edition.
Yeah.
It
It's
might
very
be
important.
that simple that we see more characters with magical abilities
Yeah, because we get into that
on the
soon.
fractions.
Yeah. But here they also explain, like Warhammer Dawnworld is a game of rounds and turns. Each game is broken into a number of rounds, and during each round both players take a turn, each of which is broken down into 4 main phases: the strategy phase, movement phase, shooting phase, and combat phase. Finally, every phase is broken into 4 steps called subphases, and that's what Jonas was talking about in the beginning. So what is it, turn? One turn is 16 subphases. So now you need to keep track of that as well.
I think they're shorter. I think they're quite short, except for the combat phase.
Yeah, but it's kind of like in 8th edition, the movement phase is now broken down into sub phases. You have like charges, compulsory moves, remaining moves, and so it shouldn't be that much of a change. I think it goes kind of well into how it used to function.
Yeah, I suppose so.
And if you have a spell sequence in every turn, one of the phases would be spells.
Yeah, I think that's I think that they phrase it just down below.
Yeah. And something, this is also pretty, like they start with the strategy phase here. We begin with the start of turn subphase, which is when certain units perform actions or take tests. These aren't common, and their details will be clearly stated in the rules. For example, Stone Trolls will take the Stupidity test at this juncture. And that is just as it was before. But then it says it's also when Night Goblins Fanatics are placed on the table. That is not the same as it was in 8th.
Oh, but it was kind of hard to intuitively for a new player to understand how fanatics work. I think if you can like streamline it so that everything functions more or less the same, it might be a good thing. For fanatics, it might remove some of the like gotcha element from it, but
that's the good part about that.
It could still be a gotcha
and for the
moment,
case
even
of
though it goes
Night
in
Goblin
the
Fanatics,
strategic
it
phase.
might be like a net disadvantage for the game, but I still think that it's good for newer players to have like to not need to necessarily know as many exceptions to the rules as just keeping track of the rules.
But how would it be a gotcha moment if they're placed in the strategy phase?
If it would state that you aren't allowed to place them unless you have a unit that is within 12.
Yeah, I guess. But then you're not forced to charge into them. Like that's the thing now. You make a charge and they come out and they hit the unit. And
well, we're not without knowing how fanatics actually work in the new old world. I would say not having them to work as they did in 8th edition and so isn't as fun. It was very fun having them pop out and scare.
Yeah.
That was very, very fun. And I will probably be sad if that goes, since I have a lot of fanatics. But I can't say which one is best until I try.
No, we'll have to see. Interesting part as well about the this says a little bit about the scenarios as well. In the strategy phase, a particular scenario may require you to check whether a victory condition has been met at this point. That should mean that there are certain like scenarios that have other win conditions than just points.
But it might be like Watchtower has that mechanic where you need to check roll a die, and then if the result of the die plus the number of rounds played is over 10, then you end the game. It might be those kind of
Yeah.
Yeah.
checks.
This opens up a few doors, like I talked about before. I would like to see more scenarios, and if we have a few smaller, like you have one unit in each quarter of the table, you gain a victory point or something.
Yeah.
It could be small things throughout
like
the game.
randomizing which quadrant you need to control, or I
Yeah.
think it's going to be something like that. Objective play, possibly.
Yeah. What do we think about this then? This is probably one of the biggest changes. In the second subphase is more exciting, Command. This is when most characters' special rules fire off. For instance, a Bretonnian lord brandishing the Falcon Horde of Fredemund may blow it in the Command subphase, hopefully preventing opponents from being able to fly. Basically, like they have special items or special abilities that they can use.
I think that's from Sigma, right?
Yes.
So maybe it's
think
like a spell and not a spell. It would be like the Empire guy. He's not a He's not a mage. He's not a wizard, but he can do things. What is it called? Warrior priest.
Yeah, they have, but they have. You do that in the magic phase, like
but
spells,
that
prayers.
would be probably exactly the same as this guy.
Yeah.
Doing something that makes the combat different.
This very much looks like some of the magical items that are already in the game. Martin, what is the name of that Beastman item that negates shooting attacks?
The Chalice of the Dark Rain.
Yeah, this is basically the same thing, except that you need to test for it.
Yeah, and you have you have Poison of Strength as well. You activate. Poison of Swiftness. All of those is also activated. So maybe it's not that big of a change.
Yes, maybe
I'm
they
hoping
changed where it goes.
Sorry.
Yeah, they changed where they use where they use the same things. The items and spells probably exist like in the old game, but you don't do them in the same time as
No, the units, the items specify when they're used in 8th edition. But here it seems like they have collected it in one place.
It's too early to tell, I think, because it would be a shame if you couldn't have like hidden items that you want to reveal at the start of combat. Like, now I'm going to use my Potion of Strength and absolutely like go full blender mode with my Vampire Lord.
Yeah, but you might have the command subphases in the like close combat and stuff as well. So, and then you can do the same thing.
Yeah, the command subphase could be the same thing as the magic subphase that it is in many of the turns, all of them.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping for a return. I don't know what to call it, but I'm hoping for magical items, because that's like half of building a list. You know, basically what kind of units you want, but you can adjust your playstyle depending on the magical items you have. I want this character to get in combat. I want him to stay close to the flanking units, or like building a list takes 5 minutes. Figuring out the last 200 points of magical items that's the game pretty much of list building.
Yeah, but this could be one of those magical items as well.
I would say that is a magical item, enchanted item, and it's I think that's
I would love to see a
more than
point
50-50
value on that
it's
one.
going to be magical items.
Yeah. There is item like this. What is it called?
Can't really remember. I know which one you refer to.
Isn't there a banner or something that does
Isn't the Scarecrow
I think
banner?
Skaven has one.
Yeah,
Skaven has a banner where you can't fly, and you do it's like on a 4+, they don't fly or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, at least in 8th edition, all the flyers have a movement value, but they always move 10 because they have the rule fly. So if they don't, they use the regular move value, which is usually like 4 or something. So
it messes
this-
with shooting too.
This
The
kind of
scale,
indicates
yeah.
that. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, the thing that makes them not fly, it also messes with the shooting somehow.
Yeah. The Skaven
Yeah.
banner thing.
Even
This
that.
rule kind of indicates that fly now comes with a value. It's not like in 8th edition, it's just the rule word fly and then you can move 10. Here it seems to be fly and then you get a number of inches that you can move.
There is carry or models in 8 that also have fly, but a different value.
Isn't that like
No,
the
that's VAP.
Demons
That's
of
VAP.
Chaos or something?
Is it VAP? Are you sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be
VAP.
VAP. Maybe I've been mixing things up. Yeah.
So then they borrowed rules from there, and that's nice to see. Hopefully they borrowed lots of rules from VAP.
Yeah,
Well,
but
it can't be. The other thing is, it might be like a 6th edition, 5th edition, 4th
Yeah, it might
edition
be.
things, and
Yeah.
we just don't know because haven't played too long. But it's a rule that we have at least seen in VAP.
Yeah. But I guess that makes sense. Like, why would everything fly the same length? Why would like a dragon fly the same length as like a bat? That's making it a value makes sense.
Yeah. Yes.
And then we go into the spells, and here they mentioned Hand of Mork or Gork. I think it's called Hand of Gork in 8th edition. It's a conveyance spell, which means it costs in the movement phase. However, there is a third step of the strategy phase, Conjuration, which is when you cast enchantments, magical boosts for your allies, or hexes, magical penalties for your enemies. Players take it in turns during this step to choose wizards who aren't fleeing to attempt to cast. The Tomb Kings, for example, might cast Jaf's Incantation of Cursed Blades from the Lord of Nekahara. What's the casting value? Well, we go into more detail on magic during another article. But they say the casting value here, so it's a bit of a weird wording. But and this is also a spell in the 8th edition. I don't know if you can see the book here, but it's the first spell of Tomb King's lore. But in 8th edition, it gives Killing Blow, and if you already have Killing Blow, it gives Killing Blow on 5s. But here it's that you re-roll natural ones instead. So they have made it maybe a bit. That's probably weaker, right? Yeah, it has to be weaker.
It's weaker, and if I were to choose, I would always choose something that is not a reroll. To have an action, an item, and a spell or whatever that makes you reroll something, it's I don't like that in any game. It takes more time, and it just takes more time. And in this case, reroll once. It doesn't make that huge of a difference, but it takes a lot of time.
Martin, you play High Elves, I play Dark Elves. What do you think about re-rolling?
Well,
I think it's a necessity. Beastmen have rerolls as well with hatred.
but it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I agree with you. You also said, Andre, I do agree with you.
But
At least if you have to pick out the ones, if it's a value.
Yeah.
Then it's...
But I think a very important thing here that I thought about before is that it says that the range is self, but it gives this special rule to anyone within the caster's command range. And in 8th edition, you don't have a command range, but you have a general's inspiring presence. But this implies that every model does, or every caster at least, has a command range.
Yeah, like a character or something.
Yeah. Because the range is the caster's command range.
I think they streamlined the casting so that the command range is probably how far you can cast any spell.
It's gonna be it looks like it's gonna be a stat on the character. If you see, it says range self.
Yeah.
And then command range.
Yeah.
So I would assume that different characters have different range.
Yeah, and I think what Jonas said was correct as well. Like, you can always say that this range of the spell is the caster's command range. And that means a strong wizard can have 24 inch, and a weak wizard maybe have 12 inch, and maybe that's what separates a weak wizard from a strong one instead of magic levels. But
it's pure speculation.
Yeah,
And
that's pure
speaking of magic, there is no upgraded version on this spell card. That might
True.
not necessarily be true for all spells, but there isn't like any levels.
no, this spell, it has an upgraded version in 8th edition. But that increases the range, and we've been talking about the range, and that might be something they will play around with, the command range of wizards.
I kind of like the upgraded spells in 8th edition. I know that it takes it adds additional time when you try to make out what spells I'm gonna cast, what levels of the spells am I gonna cast. So it might be beneficial game time wise to shorten or reduce the number of choices that you can make, but I would be sad to see them go.
I prefer the VAP way, where you, even though if you don't have to state it, if you get the big one, you get the big one.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure if it's super necessary to have a big version and a small version. If you have a spell that is horrendous, it's horrendous even if it's small or big.
But I kind of think that the template spells, especially if you get the large template and if you're gonna 6 dice it, it's so much more terrible to get it cast than just having the small template. But
We haven't seen enough to make qualified guesses, but it feels like there's more to come.
Yeah, they should definitely be
more evenly distributed. Feels like they're going to go through every phase up until the release, which hopefully is in February.
Can I mention one thing before we move on?
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that they chose to define that there is now something that is called natural one, meaning that we can probably induce that deduct that there are going to be natural 6 as well. So for things like poison, perhaps you will only get poison from natural 6s, or killing blows from natural 6s. And that you only get
take
reroll
poison
natural
on this,
ones.
but I think you have I think that is used somewhere in 8th edition too, like a natural that it meant that you can't. Not sure, but I think I'm pretty sure I've seen natural, meaning that it's a state with the dice that is not modified.
Yeah.
So if you get 2 on the dice, but if you have -1, it's not a 1.
Yeah, but they are very clear here. I think it's mentioned 2 or 3 times, natural roll off. So it feels like, I get the feeling that rerolls or modifiers on the rolls will be more common.
Yeah, might be.
But that there is sense to keeping track of the natural result as well. So that if you make a reroll, then ideally you should be able to keep track of which ones were the original 6s and which one were rerolled into 6s.
Yeah,
and then
if
you
you
try to make difference.
If you here don't have a natural one, you can't reroll it.
Yeah.
It took 5 years to learn this game mode. I think we have time and patience to learn a new mode.
Yeah, it should be fine. Then they say the final step in this phase is rallying fleeing troops. This is when the active player must attempt to rally all of their units that are fleeing. To take a rally test, choose a unit and roll 2 dice against its leadership characteristic. If you fail, it will continue fleeing during the movement phase. If you pass, the unit is allowed the free reform move and returns to the fray. We'll have more on morale later in the article too, but please bear in mind that if your unit is under half strength, it gets the -1 modifier to its leadership when attempting to rally, and under 25%, you only need a natural double 1.
That's the favorite part for my sake in the entire article.
That you only rally on double 1s.
And they hint something of half strength.
Oh, they say half strength, you get the -1 modifier to
Is that
leadership.
unit strength?
It doesn't say unit strength, it say half strength.
And in this case, talking about a leadership test, and in the next sentence, if you are below 25, so they somehow, I hope that they are talking about unit strength.
I don't think so. I'm not as sure. Like, if we did this video and you two were sick, I could say we are at half strength today. That doesn't necessarily mean, like, it can just mean half.
Half strength. So
Yeah.
you mean the strength value of the character or the
Number of models, I think.
number of models?
I think they might just mean half. You could be right. It could be hinting at unit strength. But
I hope.
I could read this as well as it's just half the number of models, that the unit is at half strength. But
But it
I'm
would
not
be interesting to see unit strength make an appearance in the game. Like if you have a unit of strong rock trolls against a unit of the numerical same amount of models, like 6 against 6 models, it should be that the rock trolls are still stronger.
Yeah, if you have like 6 peasants against 6 trolls, then
Yeah.
that does make sense.
Quick note on natural from the Warhammer rulebook. Is it natural? Question mark. You notice that some of the rules refer to natural dice rolls. This refers to the actual number of the dice rolled, ignoring any modifiers that might apply to it.
Yeah, and that's from the 8th edition rulebook.
Yeah.
But that is the entire article. Then they only say that there are a lot more to clue you in on Warhammer the Old World in the coming months. We'll be tackling the rest of the phases, plus rules for magic, morale, psychology, and other matters. And we'll also be taking a closer look at the factions, the setting, the models, and the future of the game. Only here on warhammercommunity.com. So all in all, I have to say this is a pretty big reveal on the rules. We haven't gotten anything basically since 2019, so
It's
this does
getting
make me
close.
happy.
That's what I say. It's
Yeah.
getting close.
Yeah, but they've already said it's in the beginning of 2014, so we are close. We are really close.
What do we make of the art in this article? We have the medical item is supposedly a Bretonian item. The spell is supposedly a Tomb King spell. But the top art seems to depict high elves versus orcs and goblins. Is that
The
anything?
Empire. Oh, there, yeah.
Yeah, this is Hyles, but isn't this an old picture? This looks old. It might be a new one. But this is definitely Goblin Wolf Riders against High Elf Spearmen. You see a Pegasus here in the back. And down here you have some trolls against Empire, I believe.
I suppose we shouldn't make educated guesses based solely on art styles, but
No, I don't know all the old art good enough to know if this is new or old art. But it's in a very old style.
I've never
so-
seen the trolls. The trolls I've never seen.
No, but they are pretty much exactly the sculpts from Games Workshop.
Yeah.
In the
really
river
cool
trolls, you have one troll puking, and there's fish bones in it, and one with a weapon that is a skull tied up to a pole. So it's very close to the model art. So these could be early renderings, or they could be made afterwards, but they're very specific by the model.
Yeah, and this is definitely a Empire halberdier you have here.
Yeah. The
You
puffy
have
arms.
this. Yeah, you even have the same swords and pouches that they have. So
It's so gruesome. The guys in the back that have gotten the troll vomit in their eyes and standing there mortified. Really
what we
liking
could
this
say
kind of
about the
art style.
art is that it is pretty dark.
Yeah,
It's
should
not
be
like a family book.
No,
Or a
it's not
kid's book.
something you show to the kids. This
No.
isn't it. But do you have any like final thoughts about the rules and stuff that we have gotten to see so far? Are you
It's the
feeling
magic
good?
phase.
Are you disappointed? Are you happy?
Magic phase.
I'm not disappointed. I'm actually happier than I thought I would be, because it feels like a revamp of the game and picking bits and pieces from other versions and so on. I'm not convinced yet that it will be the best game mode ever, but something new and something different might be exciting.
Any other thoughts, André?
The magic, since it's spread out, I'm pretty sure that we're not going to see Winds of Magic, and we're not going to see the the battle between dispel dice and magic dice, and I have always found that it's very, very fun to do, and it's very strategical. So that's gonna be sad if it's gone, and I think it's gone.
Jonas?
I kind of like the new start of turn phase, the strategical phase. I think it's nice that they are cleaning up some of the less intuitive rules. So I'm hopefully optimistic. This seems like in the spirit of the game.
Yeah. For myself, I think what we've seen tonight is good. What I'm looking forward to the most is seeing in the future how the close combat phase works, if they kept weapon skill and all of that. But the changes in the strategy phase, I think, is good. I have no negatives really. I just hope, as Andreas said, that I really like the Winds of Magic and all of that. And I'm not as huge of a fan of the AOS system of Magic, so I hope they keep some of the good stuff.
They've spread it out fairly decent. Like you have a lot of strategy in the movement phase, and that I'm pretty sure that's gonna stay exactly the same. But you have almost as much strategy in the magic phase. Which unit do I have to hex or augment and so on? And if you can cast like an infinite amount of spells, just try them and see who rolls the highest. That takes quite a lot of the strategy out of it. I would like to see a finite amount of dice that you can, so you have to weigh your options. I can let that one go, and I hopefully stop the next one in the close combat phase.
Yeah, and that makes for an interesting strategy where you have to like keep track of the dice during the turn. But I think that's gonna be too difficult. I don't think they're gonna go for that kind of system, but it would be fun.
Sadly.
But
And
then again, in Age of Sigmar, they do have those trackers for command points. So perhaps you get a tracker for medical power.
Yeah, that might be an option.
And then you
I
can
would love to see like a hint that they are using templates, because we haven't seen that yet.
That's true. That's true.
I somehow think that templates is a no-go for many of these. Like they do have them in Horus Heresy, perhaps.
Yeah, they do. I hope they really do bring them back. They're important for like trebuchets and stuff like that, and also breath weapons, classic.
The scatter dice is fun, but you get into that area where it's really hard if you have or really unfun even if there is someone at the table that is too nitpicky about it, that is like making it impossible to have a smooth game because they mean that every millimeter counts.
But I don't think that then it's not the game's fault.
No, but they did solve it by just like saying that on average you're gonna get X amount of dice from this template spell, and mathematically it works out. Like
I hope that they keep. I have said it many times. I'm not sure if I said it on the channel, but I hope that they have Horus Heresy complex, 40k a little bit easier, Sigmar a little bit easier, and keep Old World complex. Let's keep the templates. Let's make it
scatter dice, and let's make the
But they have said before that like the Old World shouldn't be like your first war game. That's not who they're catering to. Like this shouldn't be your first war game, and that I guess hints on the complexity in a good way. Yeah, because otherwise there wouldn't be any reason to say that.
Well, they
boost the
should
egos
say
of
it
all
so
the
they
players.
can sell stuff.
Yeah, we have to feel like we're intelligent by playing this and
Yeah.
stand above the rest of the plebs.
And we use dice that only go and our dices only go to 6.
Yeah,
like, you can count it on your one hand.
Yeah, on one hand. You're
And
inbred.
this is true.
Yeah, but in the China they count like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and yeah. So maybe you can count on one
Oh.
hand. Does anyone have any closing thoughts before we say goodbye?
I'm feeling stressed.
Feeling stressed? Yeah.
Yeah.
Painting time.
Yeah, now it's painting
Painting
time.
time.
But then I guess we'll say thank you all for tonight, and we'll see you all in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.